when was the last time America and China had a smooth trading relationship? So I thought that we need to like dig down the time when you think uh, things were smooth enough, because today things are going down south really quick.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, U.S. and China relationship always have up and downs, and even in the trade relationship, the China-U.S. relationship relationship actually goes way back. It goes back to 1784. This is right around the time when United States was founded as a nation. What happened was after the of Independence, U.S. got kicked out of the British trade empire trading system, and so they had to seek an alternative market. At that time, the U.S. elite realized, China was the world's largest market at the time, so they're gonna open a new trade route to China. So in 1784, the ship Impress of China set sail from Boston. It carried 30 tons of American ginseng to sail for the Chinese port of Canton, and it was so. For people who don't know, ginseng is a root, and Chinese believe it's some kind of miracle drug. It says anything to give you good health, to good vitality, to like aphrodisiac. It's a very important ingredient in Chinese medicine. And there's two type of ginseng that's highly valued in China: the Korean ginseng and American ginseng. So ginseng grows in the wild in America, and the Native Americans knew about its medicinal properties, so they collect them. And when Americans realize, okay, China value ginseng, no problem, we have plenty of ginseng here, so they shipped 30 tons of ginseng to China, and it was immensely profitable. The investor on the venture got 25% returns on their investment. That started the whole China-U.S. relationship.
Okay. What
But
was the route in this? Did they? I'm so sorry. What was the route they took? Do you know that? Like, yeah,
okay, so
yeah.
so at that time, there's no Panama Canal, right? So they have to go sail down South America, go around, go. They have to go around, what is
The
now
Cape of Good Hope.
Chile, Argentina,
Yeah, yeah.
and then sail into Pacific, cross the Pacific to Canton, China, because Canton, China, it was the only Chinese port that was open to foreign trade at the time.
Okay.
But Americans shipped so much ginseng, they soon crashed the market. The ginseng price just totally collapsed in China because Americans keep on shipping tons and tons of American ginseng. So they have to look for alternative product to sell to China. And the next thing they find was profitable is to sell China fur. Sorry, can you hear the dogs?
Yeah,
My dogs are going crazy.
yeah,
Let,
yeah,
let me let me calm
yeah,
them down a
yeah,
little
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
It's fine. Yeah. So Americans have to find alternative goods to sell to China. The next item they settled was fur, because at that time China was the world's largest market for fur. So traditionally, the majority of Chinese, the Han people, they don't wear fur because they think it's barbaric. Only barbarians wear fur. But in the 1644, Manchus, they breached the Great Wall and they conquered all of China. And the Manchus themselves, they came from Manchuria, really cold. They wear fur. So once they became ruler of China, suddenly that became fashionable. Wearing fur became fashionable. Now, then China, with like 400 million people, became the world's largest fur market. So the first foreigners to crack the Chinese fur market is actually Russians.
Russia.
The Russians that came from Siberia, and they fought a border war with China, but then they lost, so they demarcated the border. But for the Russians, the most important thing is they gained the right to trade with China, and this brought Russians to hunt furry animals all over Siberia, and pretty soon all these fur-bearing animals getting depleted. So Russia Russians then went further east. They went across the Bering Strait into Americas. So the Russians were the first to pioneer to get furs from Americas to China. Russians they ordered the natives, the Aleut people, to send in tribute to the Russian Tsar in forms of fur, and then they take that fur and sell to Beijing. And that was noted very soon. This very lucrative trade was noticed by British. British, they during when the Captain Cook was sailing around the world, they sailed to the what is present day Northwest, Pacific Northwest, which we including British Columbia on the west Canadian coast, and also like area like Oregon in Northwest United States. And they picked up about 300 fur pelts from local Native Americans. At that time, they didn't think those are valuable. And on the way returning trip, when they stopped in Hawaii, Captain Cook got killed, but the ship keeps sailing to made a stop at Canton, China. And then that's when they realized they could score 1,800% profit on the fur. And so they soon wised up, and they soon moved into that to control the fur trade in Pacific Northwest. They will trade different things with the Native Americans for the fur, and then they take it back to China. And Hawaii became a middle way point for the ship to stop. So Americans then followed the British. They also got moved in because at that time it's a sea otter pelt. The sea otter have a lot of fur, and there was so much hunting of sea otter, it almost wiped out the entire population of sea otter, because they were sending about like some like numbers are pretty insane. They were sending like about 6 million fur pelts from America to China in order to exchange for Chinese goods, because China was the world's largest economy at the time. And on the way to China, Americans and British, they stopped by Hawaii, and they realized the island of Hawaii have natural sandalwood. They have a sandalwood forest, and those sandalwood, because their scent, fetch a high price in China. So they start cutting the sandalwood forest in Hawaii and sending all those woods to China as well. So even today, the capital of Hawaii, Honolulu, in Chinese is known as Tanshangshan, literally the mountain of sandalwood. And this later also brought the British and the Americans to colonize the Pacific Northwest. This is so the fur is what attracted them to the region, and they start colonizing the region, and later Hawaii as well. But when they wipe out the sea otter population, they have to move on to the next target. So the next thing was fur seals, and that was in South America, in like Argentina, Chile, and they went to places like Tasmania, New Zealand. So Europeans knew Tasmania and New Zealand existed before, but they kind of didn't bother with it because they feel like there's no profit. And once they realized, oh crap, we can make tons of money to get furs from those places, that brought the British colonization and settlement in places like Tasmania and New Zealand. And so this is all because of China trade, because China was the world's largest market. But very soon, after they depleted all the sea otter population, the fur seal population, they just pretty much wipe out the sandalwood forest in Hawaii. They had to find something else to trade, and that's when they discovered opium. And the British, this is a well-known story about Opium War. The British, they started they made the Indian farmers to plant opium instead of stable food crops, and they collect them as taxes. And British form a whole monopoly around opium growing in India. And so British dominated the opium trade, but Americans also play a part. This is a part very few people realize. British dominated about 85% of the opium smuggling into China. Americans have 15% of the market. So the British, because they control British India, they will ship the Indian opium to to China. At that time, the world's wealthiest man was a Chinese guy, Ho Kwa, and he saw British was making all this killing. He wanted to get into the trade, so he decided, but he can't go out because the Chinese imperial decree forbid Chinese from going abroad. So then he approached Americans. He used Americans as his proxy. He's like, okay, I'm gonna pay you money. I'm gonna pay you this all this Chinese tea you can use as consignment to sell in England and America. My what I'll ask you is go to Turkey, get the Turkish opium to come here. And so that's what the Americans did. They smuggled Turkish opium into China, and they have about 15% of their market. And because of collusion with at then the world's richest man, Chinese merchant Ho Kwa, they were able to get in, smuggle things through the custom. And a lot of these American so-called Boston Brahmins, Boston Brahmin is a term that referred to the upper class New England elite in America at that time. Many of these Boston Brahmin families got their wealth in the opium smuggling trade. One guy in particular was a young man called John Murray Forbes. These people usually came to China to do trade for their family when they're teenagers, and John Murray Forbes returned back to United States at a ripe age of 24 and already a millionaire from the opium trade. And he went down and he became a proxy for Ho Kwa, the richest Chinese man. Ho Kwa put in $500,000 into John Murray Forbes' first investment bank business. So John Murray Forbes used his opium smuggling funds to invest in America's railroad. I mean, John Murray Forbes was known as a banking tycoon and railroad tycoon. So America's first industrialization was financed with opium money. And many people do not know this, but John Murray Forbes have descendants today. For people would know John Kerry, but people do not know his middle name is Forbes, John Forbes Kerry. And this is not only one. There's another famous American opium smuggler. His name is Warren Delano, and he has a grandson called FDR. FDR, the D in the FDR, FDR is Roosevelt, of course, but the D in FDR stands for Delano. That's the name of his grandfather, Warren Delano. So FDR was born with a silver spoon in his mouth from birth because he got, he's born into this opium smuggling fortune of his grandfather. FDR, they have a mansion in Hong Kong. Inherited from their grandfather, from all these old. So a lot of the American top institutions, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the early endowment were all from these opium smuggling Boston Brahmin families. I mean, this is a story of how
Whoa.
America started. This is the real story of U.S.-China trade relationship. That story is very little told today in America. You have to dig deep to if you don't know these names, Warren Delano, John Murray Forbes, you probably wouldn't have known the story. But yes, this is how the first wealthy class of New England elite got started. They got started by smuggling opium into China.
Whoa.
Go ahead, you have a question.
Yeah. So, what timeline? Where are we on the timeline right now? What is the time bracket when we're talking about this
Well, yeah. So
Boston Brahmin?
this is right before Opium War. So from 1784, when the two sides first started trading, to about 1840. This is time before the Opium War. So after the Opium War, British, it was the one who won for themselves through their victory all the rights and concession in China. One of the rights was they would have extraterrestrial rights. So that means British citizens cannot be prosecuted for any crimes committed in China under Chinese court. They have to be judged by the British themselves. And then China had to set up certain cities like Shanghai. They have to they not only they give ceded the island of Hong Kong to Britain, but they have to open the ports in Shanghai, um, and several other ports open to British, and they had where the British were allowed to have their own settlement. It's called the British Concession, where only the British laws apply. So this is then when the Americans saw that, they saw, oh wow, we want that too. So they sent their own warships to China. At that time, China just suffered the defeat in the first Opium War by the British. They didn't want to have any other war. So it was like, okay, you can have the same privilege that we granted to the British. So Americans, they also got a piece of Shanghai, American concession. So eventually, the British concession and American concession in Shanghai, they fused together to form the so-called international settlement in Shanghai. French, they will have their own French concession. There's also a French concession in Shanghai. So all in this like European enclaves on Chinese port cities, only Europeans laws apply. And, it's the Chinese that will have to ask permission to enter these areas. There was a famous people who are, Bruce Lee fans. You may have remember a Bruce Lee movie. Famously, he went to park in Shanghai. There was a sign says no dogs and Chinese allowed, and Bruce Lee got pissed and he kicked the sign with a kick. So this is actually people did a research. So this is actually true. They did not put a sign, but there's a regulation says the park is only reserved for Europeans and no dogs. So yeah, basically no Chinese and dogs are allowed. And so that was a condition China was living under. And then in 19 in 1900s, there was a Boxer rebellion in China because the Chinese were fed up with all the foreigners coming in, because not only they brought in opium, they also brought in missionaries, Christian missionaries. That was one of the conditions that the European power imposed on China, that they have China have to accept Christian missionaries. So the Christian missionaries were built churches all over China. And now by 1900s, the Chinese were fed up with all these Christian missionary activities in China. So this is this background of Boxer rebellion. They rise up. They want to kick out all these foreign missionaries, all these foreigners, and that led to the so-called Eight Nation Alliance expedition against China. So the Eight Nation was Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, US, Japan, Austria-Hungary. Yeah, that's 8. So 8 nations, they send troops to this time Americans, they send in the American Marines. They sacked Beijing. The Chinese imperial government fled. They capture Beijing. You can still find pictures of these foreign troops marching into the Forbidden City in 1900s. This is what Chinese would call the century of humiliation. And Americans play a part in that. But it's not just that simple, because one of the things U.S. during all this time, U.S. was also moving west, colonizing the western half of the United States, and they captured they got California, the coast of California, from their war against Mexico. But for people who don't know the geography of the United States, the population center, like in the Midwest, there's not that many people. But then you have most of the population back then is on the East Coast. So to get to the California, you either have to take this very dangerous long trek through the American West, or you take a ship that goes all the way around Americas to go to California. So that's when they decide to build a cross-continental railroad. And guess what? There's not enough people. There's not enough Europeans, workers in California to build a railroad. So that's when the Americans, all these railroad barons, they decided, you know what? We can ship the workers from China. And this is when U.S. signed the so-called Burlingame Treaty with China, because before Opium War, Chinese imperial government, they forbid any Chinese from going abroad. So after Opium War, that was scrapped. But the Burlingame Treaty between the United States and China was specifically allow Chinese labor to go to United States so they can build the railroad. And so this is when start tens of thousands of Chinese start to go to California. Well, they already went to California when their gold was discovered during the gold rush. There were a lot of Chinese going to California for the gold rush, but even more Chinese was brought over to build the railroad. Um, and because they don't have enough workers on the west coast, so kind of Chinese built the most difficult section of the cross continental railway from California through the Rockies, up to Denver, and that's where the railroad got linked with a crew that was building the railroad from the east. And by the time when they're celebrating the construction of the railroad completed, they got all the Chinese out of the picture. They don't want Chinese to show up on the photograph. So only those Irish immigrant workers who have been working on the railroad from the east got their picture taken in the photograph. That's another piece of Chinese American history. That started kind of the Chinese immigration into U.S. Around 1860 and onwards, as a result of the gold rush and railroad. And now, back to China. So U.S. have all these now. They have a lot of missionaries. U.S. sent a lot of missionaries in China. I do have to give at least they brought modern medicines to China. I don't like what other stuff they were doing, but they did. Granted, they did bring modern medicines to China, and so after you can understand there was a lot of anti-foreign sentiment against foreigners in China at this time. But then what happened was in the nine. So okay, the flip side of the opium trade was the Chinese. They decided they realized when they realized they couldn't stop the inflow of drugs, they decided, you know what, if we can't beat them, we'll have to join them. So the Chinese officials said, rather than all these Chinese silver flowing out into the pockets of British officials and British merchants and Americans, let's just plant opiums ourselves. So they legalized. So one of the conditions for the Opium War was for China to legalize the opium trade. So the Qing government legalized everything, planting. So the Chinese farmers start to plant opium in China. So by late 1800s, early 1900s, there was enough opium planted in China. So actually, the opium import from India and Turkey start to die off. But then at that point, the opium start. One of the major growing opium region is actually my home province, Sichuan and Yunnan in the southwestern part of China. And the opium grown there will be loaded on ships, sailed down to Yangtze River, to Shanghai. Now, around the early 20th century, chemistry have developed to the point now they know how to refine morphine from opium. And then they can refine heroin from that. So the Chinese gang members, the Green Gang, they hired the European chemists to set up heroin factory in Shanghai to process the opium into heroin and export them to United States. This is another aspect of U.S.-China trade, and then but during the World War II happened. So that drug flow was actually interrupted because the Japanese, they wanted the opium trade for themselves. They want to seize so Japan also used the opium trade to finance their own wars against China. And no more opium was going to America. So American addict had like a few years to go cold turkey, and then like that's when the perception of Europeans actually started to improve after the Japanese invasion, because oh my God, the Europeans, Americans were bad, but the Japanese were like 100 times worse. And during World War II, Britain and United States were allies of China. So that's when the image of Americans actually start improving drastically during World War II. Like people who traveled to China, during that time we reported, Chinese people are very friendly to our to our Americans, and so there was a mini honeymoon period, and because one of the thing is China depended materials, and but Japanese control all the Chinese coastal areas. So only way for war material to reach China was through British Burma, through the so-called Burma Road, and then when Japan conquer Burma, that road was also cut off. So Americans, they started the American Air Force and start flying from British India to airdrop supplies, to fly air supplies into China, flying over the so-called Himalayan hump. This is a part of the story of the Flying Tigers during the World War II. And so at that time, the Americans were very popular because they were seen as friends. And then, as the World War II comes to a close, you know, for U.S. vision of post-war order, they wanted to make Chiang Kai-shek's China to be like their junior partner in East Asia, sort of like the role that Japan is playing today. But back then, the idea is to have Chiang Kai-shek's China play that role. So U.S. actually deploy about 60,000 troops to China after World War II in the so-called what is it, Operation Beleaguered or something, and their goal is ostensible goal was to evacuate the surrendered Japanese military and civilians back to Japan, but one of their very important purpose was also ship the troops from Chiang Kai-shek's army, because Chiang Kai-shek, his KMT army was the U.S. ally, but most of his troops were bottled up in the southwest China during the war against Japan. So they had to, in order to reach the occupied Japan to accept the Japanese surrender, they rely on Americans to provide them with air transport and naval transport. And another problem is a lot of this. The communists has already set up bases in the Japanese occupied area, especially countryside. The communists control a lot of the countryside in the occupied areas, but the Japanese were only like holed up in the big cities. So both the communists and the KMT, the Chiang Kai-shek's army, try to have a race to those big cities to accept Japanese surrender. So this is where Americans, they provided air power and their warships to transport Chiang Kai-shek's troops to those cities, to like especially big cities like Beijing, Tianjin. They didn't want those to fall into the communist hands. And so American Marines played that role, and this brought them into the conflict with the communists. And at that time, U.S. Navy also headquarters to Qingdao, China. So the headquarters of U.S. 7th Fleet in 1946 was in Qingdao, China. And they have a vested interest to, they actually, U.S. Navy actually petitioned the U.S. government to enter the Chinese Civil War on behalf of Chiang Kai-shek, just so they can keep their naval base secure in China. But that didn't happen, so they had to get the hell out, first to the Philippines and then later to Japan. So now the headquarters is in Japan, but before it was in Seventh Fleet headquarters was in China. This was part of the Cold War. U.S. was waging with the Soviets as well, because Soviet Union at the end of the World War II, they sent over 1 million Red Army into Manchuria to capture it from the Japanese. And so Soviet very soon they have control of the entire Manchuria. They control the very important port city of Dalian, or AKA Port Arthur. This is a goal, the port that Russian always wanted. Russia always want like a warm water ports, right? And they consider this is a return to Port Arthur. After their defeat by the Japanese Imperial Army back in the 1904-05 Russo-Japanese War. So one of the reason, so Port of Dalian, if you look at the map, Port of Dalian is like right here. American 7th Fleet set up their headquarters just on the peninsula, just a little bit down south in Qingdao. So when the Soviet Far Eastern Fleet and the American Seventh Fleet leave out the port, they will literally run into each other, right? So this is another reason, the Soviet, they throw their back. They finally throw their back into the Chinese communists in the Chinese Civil War, and so very quickly the communists won, and then the Americans were kicked out. At that time, U.S. withdrew. U.S. ambassador left, and then U.S. started a decade-long policy of economic blockade against China, economic sanction and blockade, right? Because right after establishment of People's Republic in 1949, Korean War broke out in 1950, and then right after the Korean War broke out in June, President Truman authorized the U.S. Seventh Fleet to sail down their aircraft carrier groups into the Strait of Taiwan to prevent the Chinese People's Liberation Army from crossing the Taiwan Strait to liberate Taiwan. So the Taiwan issue remained today
It
because
sounds
of
so
that,
familiar.
and because because Mao already had about 500,000 men stay ready to go to Taiwan, because they were blocked by the U.S. Seventh Fleet. Mao's okay. Let's send them to Korea, and so China entered the Korean War in October that year. So there is a chronology is important. U.S. first sending the Seventh Fleet in the Taiwan Strait in July, and then China then sent the army that was supposed to go to Taiwan to Korea in October 1950, and China entered the Korean War. So after the Korean War, there was basically complete diplomatic, economic blockade of China by the U.S.-led Western camp until basically 1972, right? But Pakistan played a role because Pakistan was a go-between between Henry Kissinger and China, because Pakistan already have good relationship with China after 1962 China-India war, so really the relationship got a reset after Nixon visited China, and then in 1972, immediately after Nixon visit, there was still there was, so people know about Israeli lobby, but they don't know about Taiwan lobby. Taiwan lobby is still very powerful. They bought off a lot of U.S. congressmen. So when Nixon visited China, that started the process of normalization, which happened in 1978 under Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping. But as part of the normalization of ties between China and United States, the U.S. Congress passed the so-called Taiwan Relation Act, which says U.S. needs to come to Taiwan's defense, by which they mean U.S. need to sell weapons to Taiwan, and so this is always a thorn on the side of China-U.S. relationship. Continue U.S. weapon sales to Taiwan, but during the Cold War, people don't realize this. U.S. actually stationed nuclear missiles on Taiwan pointing at mainland China. So as part of the Nixon visit, the U.S. military left Taiwan, and U.S. nukes and U.S. missile left Taiwan. But now Trump is trying to put them back in. Well, we're not at the nuclear missile part yet, but now there's 500 Marines on Taiwan right now, and they're sending some U.S. Army Green Berets as observers. So
Just days
so the
ago.
Cold
It's
War is
so
back up.
familiar. Like everything's so familiar happening
Yeah, yeah,
again.
yeah. Yeah, it's a they're trying to bring back the Cold War, right? Basically, and so after 1970s, when Deng Xiaoping became the leader of China, this was a honeymoon period between U.S. and China. And China started to open up. One thing China started to like people. I have to remind people. it was not China that closed its door on the United States. The U.S. had an economic sanction on China up till 1970s, up till the Nixon visit and Jimmy Carter's normalization of ties, and then this two sides start trading. But initially, most of the trade was done by intermediaries. Like the first batch of investment that came to China was by overseas Chinese in Hong Kong, in Southeast Asia, uh, from Taiwan as well. But at that time, Taiwan was still under martial law, so they couldn't do direct investment. So a lot of the Taiwan businessmen, they have to shuffle their funds through Hong Kong to China. So there was a lot of, so the first initial wave of foreign investment in China was actually by the overseas Chinese. And a lot of these economies already was kind of integrated with American economy to a certain extent, because US started to offsource their manufacturing to East Asia in the 1970s. A lot of them landed in places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, the four Asian tigers, right? The Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore. And and then when China opened up, suddenly there's a vast pool of cheap labor that's well educated. And so all the factory bosses in Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc., they all went to China to open shop. So there was a second wave of offsourcing, of manufacturing from places like Hong Kong and Taiwan to China, because the labor cost is even cheaper. And then because these factory bosses, usually they make goods for exports to United States, so they already have that tie with their customer base in US. So now they just turn around and export to US using China. And at that time there were a lot of Taiwan, Hong Kong bosses, in places like in southern China. Many of them have multiple mistresses. It was a good times for those people, and because China was poor at that time, and then when China finally, so at up to that point, China have the so-called most favored nation status in trading with United States. But it's actually really misnomer. For United States, most favored trading nation status actually to any nation that have a normal trading status with United States. If you're not on the most favored trading nation status, that means you are being sanctioned. And so there was an annual debate in U.S. Congress after the Tiananmen Square protest whether to extend to China the most favored trading status. So China decided, you know what, we got to get over this annual congressional circus. So China petitioned to join the WTO in the 2000s, and that is a big game changer after China joined the WTO. This was favored by the big U.S. multinationals at this point, because they're all
Yeah.
ready to do the labor arbitrage in China. And that was a big moment when so before 2000 it was mostly the overseas Chinese capital that going to China. After China joined the WTO, that's when the big money from those US multinationals, European multinationals, they start to pour in China. Then you have people like Apple, open shops in China. Everybody was making
So
their
China
product
joining
in China.
WTO,
Start
this
from
is
Go ahead.
year, this is year 19.
This was early 2000.
Oh, okay.
China joining WTO is in the early 2000. So starting, but Chinese economy already started to take off. Like I would say even right after end of Cultural Revolution, because I was born in 1976, 1 month after Mao died, and I can tell you, I grew up in China in the 1980s. I could tell you, like, I was witnessing life was getting better year by year in China. I have a very happy childhood in China. That's why I always have very fond memories of China, and things were getting better and better. And but around, because I still remember when I first came to U.S. in 1990, it was still pretty rare to see made in China product. Like my parents, we went Christmas shopping and I saw a teddy bear that was made in China. We're like, oh wow, so surprised. So my parents bought it for me, because it was rare at that time. But like few years later, everything was made in China. It only took about like 5 years for that to happen, because China had already built up the production capability in the 80s and 90s when they opened up to the foreign overseas Chinese capital, because it's there's a lot of a lot of wealthy Chinese from Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan. They all rush in to build factories in China in the late 80s and early 90s. So by the time when Apple came to China, there's already a very well-established supply chain, right? Apple, they contracted through Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company, who set up the factory for them and to assemble all the goods. So initially, a lot of the manufacturing was just like making Apple. Like all the components are sourced from elsewhere, from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, US, and you just ship to China for these factory workers to put it together because labor is cheap. But what happened was, that's never what China intended to be doing for the long term. So what China had done was they started to climb the tech tree. They start to, first of all, China investing in education. Before, during the Cultural Revolution, a lot of schools were closed. By the way, a lot of top university were closed. But after that, all the schools were reopened. University were reopened after 1978, and more schools were start to open up. So more Chinese people are getting educated, and a lot of uh, the overseas Chinese who had operated factories, when they came to set up shop in China, they also brought in like the management techniques, that they brought in their own expertise, the tech expertise with them. And so this happened very organically. And China also sent a lot of students abroad to learn for, in Western universities. My dad was one of them. My dad went to United States in 1985 to study for his PhD. At that time, Deng Xiaoping said, I understand most of them will never come back, but it's okay. Even if only 20% come back to China, that's a net plus for us. So that's what happened. That's, like, I remember at my father's classmates who graduated from U.S. University around early 90s. Many of them stay in U.S., got their green card, got their citizenship, joined the U.S. corporate world. But after they work about 20 years, by 2000s, a lot of them have hit like a glass ceiling, or some people call it bamboo ceiling, because whether because of language barrier, or cultural barrier, whatever. A lot of them find they could not rise above to senior management position. And whereas if they go to China, the sky is the limit. They can be founders of companies, they can be CEOs. By the way, that's the story of the founder of TSMC, Morris Chan. So Morris Chan himself was born in China, and then later he immigrated to United States, and he was a top guy at Texas Instrument. But he wanted the top job. He wanted to be the CEO, right? But they never give it to him. They keep on denying him to promote him to the top job. So finally, he said, you know what, forget it. And that's when the Taiwan government came to him and say, hey, we'll give you money, we'll give you all these tax breaks for you to set up this semiconductor manufacturing plant in Taiwan. And he said, okay, let's go. And then he built TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. Now one of the most valuable piece of tech companies in the world. So, but same thing was happening in China in 2000s. A lot of these Chinese students who went abroad to study, who stayed, work in U.S., gain a lot of experience, and suddenly they find themselves, you know, they're not getting promoted. They're not getting promoted to the top job. They're never going to be CEOs, and so they're like, okay, you know what? where I'm going back to China. I can found my own company. I can be CEO. I can be VP. I can be what I want to be. So all the ambitious ones start to go back to China in 2000s, and that kind of kicked off this Chinese miracle. Like this, like then Xiaoping already passed away, but I'm sure he had foreseen this. Like this is what he wanted. He sent us Chinese students abroad, so for them to eventually come back to bring back their expertise, their knowledge. But for Americans today, they say, oh, that China are stealing, they're stealing our technology. It's like, look, dude, you did not pay for these Chinese students' education, right? These guys work themselves. They work in those companies. They're the ones. A lot of the time, they're the ones who created those technology. Because if you go to American research labs, I did. My dad. I went to visit my dad in University of Illinois at Chicago labs. I look around. It's all Chinese grad students. It's all Chinese grad students working there. So these guys are these guys are the backbone of the U.S. science and research, right? And somehow like the Americans think the Chinese stole their tech, but no, we built your tech. We're the ones who are building your tech. But yeah, so when U.S. companies, especially these Fortune 500 companies, they went to China. They intended for China as they saw as a labor arbitrage opportunity. They intended for China to stay this vast pool of cheap labor for U.S. manufacturing. But China did that, but China did even more when they start to do their own thing, when they start create their own brand, and that's when they became competitor to these Western companies. That's when the Chinese trade starting to become unacceptable. It was fine for China just be the cheap labor. Do the sweatshop jobs, making shirts, making Nikes, making Apple phones. Uh, it's not cool when China start making Huawei phones. That's taking market share from Apple, right? That's when United States really went hard against Huawei, because here is a Chinese company, tech company, that has its own indigenous, develop its own indigenous supply chain, its own indigenous Chinese technology, that threatening the flagship of American companies like Apple. And that's not acceptable for them. And U.S. putting a lot of political capital to kill Huawei. They arrested the Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou for supposedly sanction busting on Iran, because Huawei sold telecom equipment to Iran. And yeah, and this is the whole idea is to slow down China's progress, right? This is the whole idea behind the chip sanction against China. They're very explicit. We have to stop China's AI development, because the way to do that is we found the weakest chain, the weakest link in their supply chain, which is semiconductors, because China still had to rely on TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductors, to actually manufacturing the advanced chips. Huawei already started doing their own advanced design for their chips, but once they design it, they send their design to Taiwan to actually make it into a chip. And that and TSMC were able to do that because they source this machine called from ASML, a Dutch company, that basically etch the using laser to etch those chips in like very fine increments, like 5 nanometers, right? This is the most advanced chips in the world. So that's when the US realized, oh, you know what? All these companies, they rely on US one way or other, on like whether a piece of software or US financing. This is our leverage. If we put secondary sanction on companies like Huawei, that means they're not going to, so they can tell the Dutch company ASML. First, they tell the Taiwan Semiconductor, you can no longer make chips for China, for Huawei. And then they tell, then China's like, okay, no problem. We will try to make our own. So they try to import those ASML. They're trying to import those UV machine directly from the Dutch company. And then U.S. went to the Netherlands government and tell you cannot allow ASML to sell their machines to China. And so they wanted to completely choke off the Chinese innovation. And the whole idea is China's AI was developing too fast. And they find that a threat because right now there's a big AI bubble in United States. Hundreds of billions of dollars are plowed into it. And and the idea is they think they're going to reach the AGI, artificial general intelligence, which means like basically the machine can reasoning like human beings. And they think if they get to that point first, United States will be able to develop Skynet and Terminator, and China will be screwed. So they will have to do whatever to slow down China's progress on AI, so U.S. can get to AGI first. So that's the rationale behind the U.S. semiconductor sanction on China. But that hasn't worked out because China just find ways around. Like they haven't they're now already before China could only make like 24 nanometer chips, and now because of this tech sanction they're forced to come up with a way to make 7 nanometer chips themselves. Still they're still not at 5 nanometer and 3 nanometer level yet because you need EUV machine for that, which Dutch are not selling them to them, but they're finding ways around. So instead of use if they don't have 5 nanometer machines, what do? Well, it's fine. We still have 7 nanometer chips. We'll have a whole bunch of machines clustered together, right? I mean, like it's for computing. We okay, sure. Our one chip might not be as powerful as your latest NVIDIA AI chip. We'll just use tons of chips. We'll end up with the same computing power. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to energy consumption because all these AI data centers, they consume a lot of energy. And one thing that NVIDIA still have an edge is because their AI chips. When we're talking about like 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer, that's all marketing term. Doesn't matter. But their AI chip is most efficient, which means it consume less energy, right? But China has a. This is why China has developed a strategy for energy abundance. This is why China is covering desert with solar panels right now and wind power, and they're building nuclear power. They're building everything. So now energy in China is significantly cheaper than energy in the United States. If you look at the energy, the power generation, um, plotted over a period of 20 years. US power generation for the last 20 years flat. Chinese power generation is going up. And that only makes the Chinese energy cheaper and cheaper. And now, uh, because the Chinese production capacity, they made the solar panels cheap. Because solar panels was expensive before because of battery. China has figured out the mass production to mass produce solar panels to make it so cheap. Now the solar power is cheaper than coal-fired power plants because it's easier to maintain. Solar panels, you just need to watch them. You just need to watch them once in a while. They'll keep on making electricity. You don't have to keep on burning coal, buy coal to burn, right? I mean, this is free energy from the sun. And so right now China has abundant of energy. So it's okay. Even if their chip is less efficient than NVIDIA chip, they will just use more chips. They have more energy to burn. And that's what DeepSeek did. DeepSeek, they're okay. So the whole US model, starting from times of Windows and Intel duopoly, was Windows keep on producing all these bloated software that require more computing power. So Intel have to come up with more powerful chips, right? So this is how both companies make money. So and Nvidia, so DeepSeek's like, okay, how do we make an AI that have the same performance as American AI, but we don't have to use as much NVIDIA AI chips because that's been blocked by Americans. So like, okay, we'll just improve our algorithm. We make our algorithm more efficient, right? So you optimize the software so you don't have to rely
Wait.
on hardware as much.
Wow.
That's how. So Chinese will always find a way around. This is why their sanction, their attempt to slow down Chinese AI progress hasn't really worked. And I think Chinese AI has already caught up with US at this point. But in US it's basically right now we have a giant AI bubble. Meta, the Zuckerberg, he was poaching AI engineers, paying them like minimum $100 million each package, right? And out of the 7 top people they hire for the new Meta AI team, 7 of them are Chinese, and those 7 graduated from Chinese universities. And this is because of the world's top AI researchers, 50% are from China. Are from like those 50%, they usually graduate from Chinese universities and they come to United States for undergrad studies. Uh, that and many of them stay in US because US obviously those AI company offer insane amount of money, but what happened is that the Trump, Trump right now, he's making really, really difficult for the Chinese students to come to United States. And on top of that, he's cutting fundings to university, to science and research. And they have, Trump, his first term, he started this so-called China Initiative, which targets the ethnic Chinese science researchers, like they as potential spies. FBI's when open a lot of investigation. I mean, basically, a lot of politically motivated FBI officers who want to make a political career for themselves, they just find that the easiest way for their career advancement is to target ethnic Chinese. Open investigation. It doesn't matter whether they win the case or not. They're showing that they're doing something to stop the so-called Chinese espionage. So this is forcing a lot of Chinese then researchers now are more of them are going back to China. So before I said the most ambitious one already returned to China in the 2000 to open their own companies, but there's still many more who stay in US because they're comfortable, they're complacent. US have higher salary. They're not as motivated to go join, to compete in the very competitive environment in China. But now Trump administration had made it so miserable for those Chinese researchers and scientists. Now they're going back to China in droves. So this is why I say Trump is my president. Is my president for accelerationism. He's the president. He's the greatest American president for China.